Hey there, everybody. Happy Halloween. I am Professor Paranormal, also known as Lloyd Auerbach, and we're here tonight for pre-Halloween Q&A for anybody who's got anything they want to talk about. And I see a couple of familiar folks. Hey, Dave Manganelli is here. Good to see you. Allison, glad you're here. And I know there are a few other folks here as well. So welcome. And we can talk about just about anything, either paranormal or Halloween involved, that you like. So let's kind of get it going. Hi, Melody, with a little something. Kat, hi there. Kat's down in Australia. It's good to see some good people here. Hi, Kathy, and and Tina. So some familiar folks. That's good. If we can kind of play with things a little bit. I should mention that Dave Manganelli, who's a longtime friend and colleague, great investigator, gave me a stellar review of the Enfield Poltergeist miniseries that is actually on Apple Plus. Haven't had a chance to watch it at all. I'm going to watch a couple of the episodes tonight. So, and Melody's asking, how was the Hornet? I spoke at the Hornet on Friday night. I think my talk was good. I was actually there last Sunday night as well for a walk and talk short interview with a guy who's going to be putting something up on his YouTube channel. I'll post that on the site, on this YouTube site, or I'll have a link to it at some point. Danya and Ben, hi there. So based on Dave's recommendation, I think we should all watch the Enfield Poltergeist series if you've actually got Apple Plus. Maybe we can talk a little bit about it next time as well. It's a controversial case, and it reminds me, even based on Dave's comments, it was controversial even within the field of parapsychology. But I spoke to Maurice Gross, I should say Morris Gross is the way he pronounced it, many years ago, for when I was doing something for Fate magazine, not on that case, but he and Guy Lyon Playfair, though they were not the official investigators for the SPR, they were well-seasoned investigators. And if they had some sense of what was going on with something psychic, paranormal, or otherwise, I have to take them at their word. Problem with looking back on cases often, and this one's a little different. For those who don't know, they're using actual recorded audio of the investigation in the show, which is completely different than anything else that's ever been done. And I know that Gross and Playfair had a lot of recordings, and they kind of kept them, which was good. They had an archive of that. So that's really a good thing that they're doing. But it's always easy to look back on famous cases and come up with alternative explanations. One that I know bugs Barry Taff a lot is the Entity case that he and Carrie Gaynor did. And a friendly skeptic by the name of Kenny Biddle, he and I have taught courses together. Kenny did kind of a hatchet job on the photos that were published quite often of these streaks of light that actually happened during the case, during this poltergeist case. And from the perspective of not knowing anything about the case, I can understand how Kenny would have come to those conclusions, which was it was a number of normal explanations. The problem being that there were well over a dozen people who witnessed visually the light streaks, the plasma effects that actually happened during the case. So, that's becomes a problem when you have witnesses who saw something. You can't dismiss the photo if the photo is of the thing that the witnesses actually saw. Okay, let's see here. Oh, Dave, what do you think of the Goblin of Zaragoza, Spain? I am not familiar with that particular story. So unfortunately, I can't comment on that. But what people call goblins, of course, are often something else. Something else paranormal or something else not paranormal that's out there. All right, so if you watch any of the documentaries that are decent out there, that also bring in skeptics, the thing to remember is that the skeptics who are brought into most of these shows or movies tend to be what are called pseudo-skeptics, meaning they have a disbelief in the phenomena from the get-go, that it could not have happened the way it was described, or even video recorded or photographed or whatever else. It could not possibly have happened that way. And of course, we always look for normal explanations anyway in these cases. But they're going to come up with something, rather than saying just very simply, I don't have enough information to answer the question. I can't tell you what it could have been without having more information, which actually would be the better response. Paul's mentioning a movie. The documentary is After Death, which is now out in theaters. I saw a note on that on Friday, and I have no time this weekend, or actually this week, I think, to go see that. It focuses on near-death experiences. And Paul, you're saying it's got religious overtones. That's too bad. Spiritual overtones are okay, but religious overtones are always a difficult piece for people, I think. Have you had any experiences with the Fae, and what do you think of the fairy faith? I've known people who believe in that, coming from Ireland, and worked with a medium named Sandra O'Hara, who was an incredible evidential medium who believed in the wee folk. Or at least she talked about the wee folk. I'm not really sure how much she believed in them, but I don't have any experience with that and can't really comment. If they exist in any way, shape, or form, remember the parapsychology deals with human consciousness. Typically, it relates with effects of consciousness, and if there's a physical being, just like a Bigfoot or a fairy or something like that, that's kind of outside our range of what we would study anyway, unless, of course, they're psychic too. So I got no problem dealing with Bigfoot if Bigfoot is a psychic, but we'd be dealing with Bigfoot from a psychic perspective. Same thing with fairies in that sense. But I've not had anybody report any sort of situations like that. I've only run into a couple people over the years, besides folks from Ireland and areas of Celtic descent, who have talked about fairies, and one of them at least was a little bit off. Let's just put it that way. What do you consider the all-time spookiest ghost encounter on the USS Hornet? From Dave. Spookiest. Boy, since the Hornet ghosts are kind of cool, I think probably the spookiest experience that somebody had, which kind of didn't freak her out so much. Well, it did freak her out, but in a completely different way. Daphne, this woman named Daphne, was the receptionist for the foundation office down at the below deck, on the third deck below. And she and others had seen outside in kind of the somewhat darkened, but not completely dark area outside that office. They'd occasionally seen a figure standing there and kind of looking at them as they came out in and out of the office, and then would disappear. But she called me one day, called for me one day when I was on the ship, and I spoke to her about this situation. And the situation was that she felt that one of the sailors, the ghost of one of the sailors, was hugging her inappropriately, let's say. Either had a thing for her or something, but she was feeling seriously creeped out, and she felt like she was being sexually harassed in that sense. Her personal space was being invaded. So I spoke with, at that time, on the ship also with me was Stosh Margaret Murray, who was the psychic who actually had started the ball rolling with the investigation. She had already done some work on the ship before she brought me aboard. This is shortly after the ship opened as a museum. When she got involved, and it was a few months later for me, or in early 1999. And Stosh and I talked about this, and we realized that because the ghosts that are on the ship are former Navy people, sailors, non-coms, and actual officers, based on descriptions and such, with the exception of the chaplain, one of the chaplains from the ship from the World War II era, who still was in the Navy. we thought that there might be a chain of command issue here. So Stosh had communicated a number of times with Rear Admiral Jocko Clark, who had been a commander aboard the ship. He was one of the few that we were able to identify from descriptions and having people look at photos. Clark served aboard the ship during World War II as a commander. He died in 1971. He had been retired for quite a long time. I think since after 1953, he was retired from the Navy as a Rear Admiral. And he died in 71, which was a year after the ship was decommissioned. Right. So, but he had been identified. So we went to a space, one of the bunk areas, kind of a private bunk area where Stosh had seen him. It was apparently where one of the commanders would be during World War II, where they bunked down near the command bridge. And she started speaking to Admiral Clark and explained the situation. And we asked that Admiral Clark take care of it. I mean, that's appropriate. It's one of his people in command, more or less. He was the top officer on the ship as far as we could tell. So we didn't tell Daphne any of this. I didn't even tell Daphne we were going to talk to Jocko Clark at all. The next morning, I get a phone call from Daphne who says, "What did you guys do? Or what did you do?" And I said, "Why?" And she said, "Well, he's standing at least 50 feet, sometimes, maybe 100 feet away from me sometimes. He's not coming close to me at all. He looks very upset, but he's not coming anywhere near me like there's a restraining order." So, we just basically dealt with the chain of command, you might say. And that's happened a few other times with other people on the ship. I can't say it's too spooky. The ship might be spooky for some people in the dark, but most people don't feel spooked out by anything, except that sometimes women feel a little bit spooked out because they get pinched on the rear. They get goosed. So maybe that's not the best thing. The Horn is a pretty cool place. All right, the name of the program, Melody, was The Enfield Poltergeist on Apple Plus. That just was loaded earlier this week. All right. Is there more paranormal activity around Halloween or the full moon? It's hard to say. We do know that people, we are, as human beings, affected by the Earth's magnetic field. And the phases of the moon, basically tidal forces, interact with the Earth's magnetic field, so that causes an effect. It's been said that people may be more open during the full moon. There's that old adage that there's more crime during a full moon. That's where lunacy comes from to some extent, although most law enforcement would tell you that's because they don't need to use flashlights as much at night because it's pretty bright sometimes. But it's hard to say, and certainly there's no more activity during Halloween itself, but there may be more reports after around that point. Certainly there's more attention paid by the media because it's Halloween, so it's pretty normal. Edgar, what do spirits look like? Depends on who you are and whether you get to see something or not. Usually they look like the people they were when they were alive, although sometimes people are not as receptive to the images that are being more or less broadcast by that spirit. And they may be fuzzy. I've had one case early on where two people, a woman and her son, were seeing this figure, this apparition. The woman said that she saw a blank face, didn't know who it was. The kid said, and kept telling his mom, that he clearly saw his father's face. And there was a psychological reason that she was blocking that it was him. So as receivers of information, we pick up the signal, you might say, put out by the apparition, by that ghost, which includes, by the way, an image of themselves with clothing on. That's why ghosts have clothes. Sometimes they're seen as an outline or a silhouette. Sometimes they're seen very fuzzy. Sometimes they're seen as shadows. But that's usually about us perceiving things, not about them being a specific kind of ghost in that sense. The vast majority of apparitions that are perceived are seen as 3D, often solid looking human beings, although very often not seen all the way down to their shoes. They may only be seen to above the knee or below the knee, and there are some possibly good psychological reasons for that as well. They also typically look younger than when they died. If they died in old age, They don't look damaged if they died in a horrible accident most of the time, the vast majority of them. And they look a lot healthier than they were when they died, certainly, because that's how we all think of ourselves as human beings. All right, what's the eeriest location you've visited? Eeriest? That's a good question. That's really hard to say. I'd have to think about that. I really have to think hard about that. I know that, I've been to a lot of places that were kind of creepy looking just simply because of the decor. Sometimes they weren't even haunted. So it's really hard to say. I think there was a prison I went to in Northern Australia. And of course, Alcatraz is kind of eerie in some respects, but there was a prison I went to in Northern Australia, which was reputedly haunted. It was closed down like Alcatraz is closed down. It was kind of a tourist thing. And I was there with Japanese TV and with a Japanese medium. And that was the execution chamber. Probably felt so weirdly bad that was something that was there. So, okay. Are you familiar with Michael Persinger's YouTube video? Not specifically on his YouTube video. He seems to agree remote viewing is, of course, real. I mean, I don't care if it's Persinger or somebody else. We have so much data on remote viewing, including all the data from the Stargate program, and there's extensive amount of information out there. You can actually find, if you want to feel like sifting through stuff, it's all up on the CIA's database for or website for the things that have been released. It's almost 90,000 pages of documentation, much of which is pretty much crap. It's like things like invoices and office memos and things that have nothing to do with remote viewing. But there is actually a 4-volume set of the Stargate archives published by Ed May and Sonali Marwaha. They're not cheap. They're $100 a volume. I recommend either really the second volume, which is the second half of the program, and it's got successes and failures of remote viewing, or the fourth volume, which has a whole summary and really good summary of the entire program, and then also covers the political side of things, why the program happened, memos from people supporting it, all of that. But Persinger was a great researcher on geomagnetism, but we have a lot of people in our field who've been doing remote viewing, and we have tons of evidence for that, including a lot of really live to tape remote viewing sessions with Joe McMoneagle that are found on YouTube. Okay, Melody, when you visited the Hornet, a few people were disturbed by the burn unit area. Yeah, any place where people were in pain, recovery area on the ship. Similarly, terminal wards in hospitals, places like prisons, emotions and human experience is imprinted in the environment. That's where we call hauntings. And emotional reactions are more common. So, for example, when I visited that execution chamber at that prison in Northern Australia outside of Darwin, it just felt awful. I mean, sad, painful, fear. You feel all of this stuff coming through. That's us as human beings picking up that information in general. And that is the same in parts of Alcatraz. I mean, certainly Alcatraz doesn't have ghosts per se, conscious entities. I mean, if you were a prisoner, you wanted to escape from Alcatraz your entire stay there. That's the last place you'd be going to. And certainly the famous people like Al Capone and the Birdman of Alcatraz, they didn't die there. So they had negative association with it. So that's not unusual. Burn units, like I say, certain hospital wards, and on the Hornet, the entire recovery area off the med bay felt, like people were in pain. That's what it felt like, because they were. The name of the prison. I knew you were going to ask me that, Kat. I'm going to have to, I can't remember off the top of my head. I will have to look it up. And, I can't really do that during the show. So I'll make sure I post that somewhere. I'll put it in, I'll respond to you on Facebook Messenger, or in one of the groups. Okay. Do you think aliens, Bigfoot, and ghosts have a correlation? There is no correlation unless unless you want to consider one of two things: that some apparitions, Bigfoot, aliens, have been thought to be what are called thought forms, that our belief in these things creates an image that people pick up on, like a meme in the psychic environment that people might pick up on. That would be one thing. Then they wouldn't be physical entities in that sense. The other possibility would be that Bigfoot is psychic and aliens have telepathy or other form of psychic ability. But our field, parapsychology, doesn't deal with those things at all because we have no evidence that they are psychic projections or are psychic. So we don't deal with the biology of humans except as it relates to psi. So we wouldn't deal with biology of aliens or Bigfoot unless it relates to psi. Okay, Third Eye Spies, yep, Targ and Persinger. Russell was a great researcher. He did a lot of really good work. I think that it's important to acknowledge the people who came after Russell because Targ doesn't always do that. That there seems to be, it's not that he doesn't, he just doesn't, he talks about his own work, which is fair. But just know that Ed May was the program director from late 85 through the closure of the program in 1995 and continues to do research on remote viewing with Joe McMoneagle, Angela Ford, and a couple of other folks from the program. Dale Graff was the head of the program for some time. Russell was not the head of the program for very long. He was one of the main researchers, but there are other people who were heavily involved in that. And there are also people out there, unfortunately, who were attached to the program for a short amount of time and didn't do well and may not have stayed, who are trading on the fact that they were part of the program and kind of making more of that than it really was for that. But Russell has done a lot of good work over the years, no question about it. Michael Persinger did a lot of really amazing work. I mean, without him, we wouldn't know anything about the whole geomagnetic connection. That was his interest that got him involved in there. Paul, your wife visited Auschwitz. Yeah, I mean, I can't even, honestly, I can't even imagine if I go to Germany. Other than to honor people, I can't imagine going to Auschwitz because I know it wouldn't feel it. I would feel it all. After the Twin Towers fell in New York City, I knew a number of people who were psychics in New York who wouldn't go within many blocks of that site. Not because they were afraid of dealing with spirits, but because of the pain and agony of the people who died. They would feel it just too much. Tanya, did you ever hear about Al Capone? No, I did not hear about him being harassed by a ghost named Jimmy. I'll have to look that up. So, wasn't aware of that. He wasn't there all that long. And there are a few others here as well. But yeah, if you have some more information about that, I'd love to see that. Paul, you're familiar with Russell Targ, Ed May, Joe McMoneagle. Angela Ford was another one. You can read about her as well as Joe in our book, ESP Wars, East and West. She still is an amazing remote viewer. She was one of the best. She wasn't in the Army. She actually was an admin there. And then there is Paul Smith, who's written quite a bit and is currently, or will be teaching a course in November on remote viewing for the Rhine Education Center. So you can find the link, of course, in the description of this program, of this channel. And Paul's teaching a how-to remote viewing that you might want to consider. Okay, Kat, you're glad you're planning an experiment. Why did JFK University Parapsychology program close? Okay, two reasons that happened at the same time. In the mid-'80s, I think it was 85, I think it was, we got a new university president who, at the beginning, seemed to be really supportive of our program and of consciousness studies in general and the transpersonal psychology part of the university, and even asked us, our department, to spend time writing a major grant proposal for a Center for Consciousness Studies and Parapsychology. All right, so we had a lot of resources to put into that, but we told the president, look, if we're putting all our resources in this, we may not be bringing in a lot more new students because we normally have to spend a lot of time bringing in students. JFK University's model at the time was based on student enrollment, had almost no outside funding. We did have some, our program actually was the only program with outside funding. I'm going to get to that in a minute. All right, so he said, don't worry about that. You know, if we get the grant proposal going, once that's done, the university will carry you for a while. All right. We found out that was not the case. He was sabotaging us, basically. He also only lasted 3 years at the university. He got let go by I understand he was let go by the Board of Regents. He was creating a problem for the transpersonal psychology school, which, as it happens, was the moneymaker for the university. Now, at the same time, our outside funding came from a company called Consolidated Capital. He was owned by a guy, or run by a guy who was a multimillionaire, who was very interested in parapsychology and was supporting our program financially with outside grants. This is in the mid-'80s. Reaganomics took effect, and the commercial real estate market in California crashed, and so did his company, and we no longer had funding. So it was kind of a double whammy, and that's why the program ended for that. All right, let me go back a little bit and see, since I kind of took a long-winded thing here. Graveyard Grog, your grandfather was smuggled out of Germany by his parents. He had polio in his arm. Yeah, he probably would have been killed because the Nazis did all sorts of things. People who weren't supposedly perfect, even if they were Aryans. All right, Jason, you've walked by burial grounds and had the feeling of a gentle hand on your shoulder that made you dizzy. What would you do for establishing boundaries without talking out loud to yourself in public? A mental visualization of a force field around yourself. Trust the force, literally. Imagine that there is a field of energy around you, that there's a glass jar around you, that you're looking through a one-way mirror, anything, and also imagine that imagine somebody trying to get through that to tap you on the shoulder, and that they can't get through. It's important to actually have that part of it as well. So that is that's the start of a basic psychic protection piece. Maybe my producer can put up the links to the two places on Hightail that I've set up for people to download documents, including the psychic protection article as well. All right. I have two tiny URLs for that. It's I think one is tinyurl.com/AskProfParanormal, and the other should be AskProfParanormal2 for that. All right, Stephen Schwartz. Yes, Stephen Schwartz has been doing remote viewing since the 80s, written a number of books, including The Secret Vaults of Time and a few others as well about remote viewing. Mel Morse did research on children's NDEs, told Paul he does remote viewing too. Yeah, remote viewing is really interesting. We all seem to be able to do a little bit of it. Some people are better than others. We have a little aptitude for it as well. Okay, Melody, what is your... I assume you mean Chad Kalick. Chad Kalick was connected originally to the production company that produced Paranormal State years ago. I actually met Chad at a small conference in Tombstone, Arizona, many years ago. We got along great. I mean, he had TV experience. In fact, I found that he was really interesting in that he was denouncing a lot of what people in the ghost hunting world were saying was evidence. He knew quite a bit about the shadowy figures that were coming up on night shot camera. In fact, he gave me a tool that I did not think of, and that is that people tend to forget, and I knew this, that with night shot cameras, you still have a spotlight, and that creates shadows. So when you see these ghost hunting shows and there's a shadow, it's not a shadow person. It's a shadow of a person or of something. And you can get rid of that shadow if you separately have another source of infrared light. And his suggestion was a cheap universal remote control, which you could buy at any Rite Aid, CVS, or drugstore, because it has a little red diode on it, and that puts out an infrared signal. And in the dark, with your night shot camera, Just like if you were in the light and you had the sun creating a shadow, you could take a powerful light otherwise and shine it on the shadow and it would disappear. Same thing worked with that. So, Chad was an interesting guy. I did a TV pilot with him. He knew the ins and outs of television, but I'm not sure what he's doing these days. I give him a little bit more credit than a lot of the other folks on TV. All right, let's see here. Dave, have you ever personally witnessed any legitimate phenomena in a session with a physical medium? I've honestly only been in one session with a physical medium. That was Kai Mugi from the Felix Experimental Circle. I was unimpressed for a number of reasons. Too much to talk about here. I'm positive that at least one, if not two of the things that I saw was fraud in that situation. There were things that happened quite a ways away from him, closer to where I was seated, because he put me as far away from him as possible in a very long rectangle of a seance room, if you want to say. It was in a garage, and he was at least 25 feet away from me. But stuff was still happening really close to us at this end. So unless he had a Confederate, because you could still vaguely see where he was, there might have been some real phenomena, but I was unimpressed in that circumstance at all. And even if stuff had moved, it would have been PK, mind over matter. Couldn't say it was a spirit. Couldn't even say it was Kai. Could have been somebody else in the room, for that matter. All right. Is there a particular method or system to determine whether or not an entity in a dream is a visitor or subconscious image? Okay, so for psychic dreams in general, and especially these visitation dreams, you do have to go by kind of the general label or general experience of any psychic dream. And that is what people again and again have said when I was doing my research on my book, Psychic Dreaming, when I've talked to other researchers on this, other people have experienced things. That experience felt realer than real or felt different. So the conversation somebody has in a dream with a deceased relative feels very, very different than a recalled conversation from a normal dream. It has more of emotional content and more of a connection. It feels truly real. And I even had that with my grandfather after he died. He died on the East Coast. I live on the West Coast here in the US. And I had a dream a few days after he died, a conversation with him. And it did not feel like any other dream. And I had other dreams about him, by the way. It didn't feel like any other dream that I had. So it's really what your own experience. That's the only way to do it. You can also see if you can ask in that as well. Okay, why are spirits here on Earth? Okay, well, it depends on who the spirit is. Now remember that apparitions or entities that are of people who have died are still people. So it's consciousness after death. Personality doesn't appreciably change. Probably your reaction to the world changes because you don't have a physical body anymore. Why they're here? Well, going back in time and looking at the reports, going back and looking at all the different cases that my colleagues have done, looking at the information from mediums and psychics, from witnesses who've had conversations with apparitions and ghosts. There are dozens of reasons, all individual. So in general, sometimes people are in denial that they're dead and will argue with the living and say, I'm not dead. They're pretty much in denial. They have to pretty much know that they're dead at some point, some level of their minds. Sometimes they're possessive, like human beings alive are, of their property. Sometimes they want to make sure that their family is okay, that they don't want to leave their family because they see their family in grief and they're trying to help them out of that. Sometimes they are afraid of what's next. They don't know what's next, whether there's a heaven or hell. So they don't even try to go anywhere or let go of this world. Sometimes, and this is the weirdest one that we've heard, they didn't see the light. Okay, so the light is something we hear about, of course, in near-death experiences, also from the movie Poltergeist. And then even that comes from the near-death experience, except that near-death experiences around the world are not always with a tunnel and light. Pop culture has given us these images. And unfortunately, if somebody dies and they don't see the light like they expect to see, they don't know what to do. So we hear that as well. So it runs a range, and it's always human. It's not like somebody kept me here. It's not like there's a curse. They can also leave their homes. They don't always, they rarely are in the place that they died. The majority are not, for that matter. People do travel quite a bit. So there's a wide range of reasons, it seems, as there should be, because we're talking about humans. All right, Mew, do all poltergeist activities originate from living agents? Well, the word poltergeist, as we apply it in I guess you could say in North America, for the most part, we use that term in parapsychology to refer to living agent cases, recurrent spontaneous psychokinesis. I actually had a conversation via email with Guy Lyon Playfair before he died a number of years ago of the Enfield poltergeist case and many others. And he said that in the UK, and I've talked to other people in the UK about this, if there's physical activity reported, they will call it a poltergeist case. And then once they investigate or get more data, they'll find that it either is a living agent case or it's an apparition case. So they split it out, but they'll still call it, if it's physical activity, they'll start with poltergeist. Here in the States, based on what we learned about the initial experience, if there's no indication of an apparition as we're being told about this case, it's just purely physical, we will use the term poltergeist. If somebody's seeing an apparition and there's physical activity, we will call that an apparition case. In this instance, the apparition is using PK, mind over matter, because they can't do anything physical otherwise in that situation. So it's just really about where it's used for that. But when we talk about, again, when we deal with physical activity with no indication of an apparition or entity, and that can include, by the way, bringing in psychics and mediums and them not picking up any spirits, that is going to be a living agent case in that situation. All right, Graveyard Grog, when you're 10 years or so and your parents had a falling out with a friend of theirs and his wife, they did talk for 2 months. One night had a dream that they all met up. Okay, hugged and forgave. The next day, the exact same thing happened, everything. That is a precognitive dream. Precognitive dreams are not always about disasters. They're often about other things as well that happen, and often very, very mundane. I recommend reading my book, Psychic Dreaming, for more examples of that. Okay, let's see here. I guess I'm caught up now. Wow, that was fast and furious. All right, I'm going to go back and just in here and see if I missed anything. Looks like we're good. Okay. Whew. Stop and sip a little coffee here. Halloween, yes. Okay. Samhain, of course, which is the ancient Celtic celebration of the end of summer, the beginning of winter. So no fall, it's just like summer and winter as there. And that was what we would call November 1st. And this is the evening before Halloween is All Hallows Eve. That is when the veil between the worlds are supposed to be lowered or thinner. Some people believe that. It doesn't seem to make a difference for apparitions or hauntings or anything like that. All right, Edgar, what made you interested in parapsychology, the paranormal? Well, honestly, it was, as far as I know, and I'll kind of add to that at the end, TV and comic books, science fiction, movies, all of that got me interested. I had a TV set in my room when I was 2 because my dad worked for NBC, unrestricted watching a TV. I remember as a little kid watching TV shows like One Step Beyond and The Twilight Zone, and more importantly, of course, Casper the Friendly Ghost. Most importantly, a show called Topper, which you can find episodes of on the Internet Archive and I'm sure on YouTube as well. You can certainly find the movie with Cary Grant playing one of the ghosts, but Topper was a sitcom, and it had friendly ghosts, by the way, who not only changed their clothes frequently throughout the show, but also drank a lot. So the spirits drinking spirits. Comic books had superpowers, often of consciousness of the mind. There were characters, one character for the Legion of Superheroes who was there momentarily, who had PK abilities or telekinetic abilities. All that stuff was in what I was reading and what I was excited by. But I was also a little science geek because I got interested in space science because my dad, as part of NBC, covered the Mercury and Gemini space shots. So that was a big thing for me, and I was very interested in astronomy and geology. And eventually, I kind of expanded my interest in a variety of fields of science and physics and more about astronomy and geology. And on the other side, looked at mythology and folklore because that fascinated me. And then there was a TV show called Dark Shadows on in the 1960s, which is where I actually heard the word parapsychology for the first time, although I had read it in a Superman comic earlier than that. And it was in the right context in the show. And so I went to the library. I was probably about 12 years old, to find books on parapsychology, which also happened to be in the same section of the Dewey Decimal System of books on the folklore around vampires and werewolves and witches, which of course were all involved in Dark Shadows. So it was all mixed together. Dark Shadows is a perfect example of what's in the Dewey Decimal System. I found the science books, and that was it. I read books by J.B. Ryan and J.G. Pratt and a number of other folks. And I had been reading books by Hans Holzer, who was the ghost hunter of the 1960s as well. So I got the ghost stuff and I got the science stuff, more scientific stuff. That really got me involved in parapsychology. I mentioned one thing before. When I was 3 years old, my appendix burst. And I was in the hospital for 3 weeks. I had peritonitis. I only learned many years, actually well after college. I only learned 20, 30 years ago in a conversation with my parents that I was on the critical list and that I had almost died. So it's possible I also had, it's possible I had a near-death experience. I have no idea at that point. So, okay. Yeah. Topper Returns. I think the movie Topper is a better movie than Topper Returns. Topper Returns is easy to find on even some of the streaming services. The original Topper movie with Cary Grant is available on the Internet Archive for free. You can find it on YouTube for free. I think it's out of copyright, so it's not even on the streaming services. All right. Melody, unfortunately, the case studies course, you'd have to talk to John Kruth, who is the executive director. If you want to send me an email, my email has been posted here. I'll forward that to John and see. Yeah, you can certainly join it. Might be tough if you want to go for a grade, but you can certainly catch up if you want. Everything's been recorded, so you can certainly do that if you like. All right. Dr. Peter Guthrie was the name of the Parapsychology and Dark Shadows series. Thank you very much. Graveyard Grog. Yeah. Kind of that show, I've gone back and watched a bunch of episodes of that show. I can say ignore the Johnny Depp movie, unfortunately. If you really want to see one of the best vampire movies out there, you should watch House of Dark Shadows. That's the kind of a condensed version of the Barnabas Collins vampire story. And it's produced by Dan Curtis, who did Dark Shadows and then went on to do Kolchak the Night Stalker. So, and of course, the original Night Stalker movie, Kolchak the Night Stalker, is one of the best vampire movies and one of the highest rated TV movies ever shown on television. Okay. Yeah, House of Dark Shadows. I watched that again not too long ago. It was actually shot in Lyndhurst, which is a historic place in Tarrytown, New York, not far from Sleepy Hollow and not far from where I grew up. I grew up in that area quite a bit. So, and watching the old Dark Shadows show is pretty fun sometimes to spot the things that are mistakes in the background, the goofs and bloopers, because it was done live every day. And live shows like that, when they had special effects they were trying, sometimes the things didn't work quite right. All right. Take care, Edgar. Yeah, Kolchak the Night Stalker. He's one of my all-time favorite characters. In fact, you might be able to see him right up here above my head. There's Kolchak. Somebody at science fiction conventions was making little figurines. And the Night Stalker and The Night Strangler are two amazing movies, both written by Richard Matheson, one of the best horror writers of all time, also a great science fiction writer, and more knowledgeable about parapsychology than any fiction writer altogether. Um, Barry Taff was good friends with him and with his son. So the series was not as good as the two movies. There were a few good episodes, a few kind of creepy episodes, but it's really a shame. ABC tried. I mean, they put it at the worst possible time, 10 o'clock on a Friday night. That was just ridiculous because that was like the death slot. Friday nights, anytime after 9 was a death slot. That's how NBC killed the original Star Trek too. Okay, Tasha, question about poltergeist activity. If it's attached to one person, but making itself known to others. All right, it's not attached. Poltergeist, if you're talking about physical activity, which is how we refer to the term poltergeist, it's coming from a person. It's not attached to a person. And it's coming from the unconscious of that person. And it can affect other people in the sense that other people can witness it. But the pattern typically revolves around an individual who we call the poltergeist agent. And the best thing for that person to do, there's a couple of things one can do. One is to try to consciously create physical activity, but actually, try to figure out what is the stress that's causing the activity. In other words, what's going on right before the activity happens for if you're the agent for you. Do physical activity to kind of blow off steam. We've often suggested Tai Chi or Qigong as ways of actually dealing with it. Meditation can help as well. And depending on what the issue is, it might be counseling. Now, if you have other symptoms, if the agent has other symptoms, I should say, like really migraines and bad headaches, it could be related to something neurological too. But the fact is that if it's not purely physical activity, if it's something else, then we'd have to look at it differently in that circumstance. Okay, what is your, let's see, Ghost of Mrs. Muir still favorite ghost movie? I mean, that's a beautiful movie. The original Ghost of Mrs. Muir was not a comedy, it was a drama. I recommend the novel, actually. The novel's really good, too. What is your hypothesis on mind over matter mechanism? No clue. Honestly, we have no clue. In some situations, it seems to be electrostatic fields that we're creating. In others, we're affecting other kinds of action in the environment. In others, it's something else. This is the problem that even with those people, and I've worked with somebody back in the 90s who was able to do PK fairly regularly, and no matter what we tried to detect, one time we would detect one thing, another we detect something else, and then we detect nothing. And the odds are that whatever's going on with PK is something we're not looking at. And it may be some interaction in the world that we are not aware of yet in science. It's not fair to humanity for scientists to say we know everything, because they don't. And science is constantly evolving. It's not, even the laws of physics, there was not too long, and I mentioned this last time, I think, that there was some discussion now of Newton's law of inertia having been misinterpreted, and they're reinterpreting it. That's one of the basic laws of physics. And if they're going to be reinterpreting a basic law of physics, there's still a lot to learn, clearly. So I wish we knew. My book, Mind Over Matter, talks about some possible theories. There's other possible theories that other people are talking about. It's kind of a range of them. So, do a little exploration out there. One of the documents you can download actually from the two links that my producer put up earlier includes a resources guide, which will take you to some good resources on parapsychology, and especially Dean Radin's evidence page. You go to deanradin.com, and his website has got in its library some resources of papers in the field you can download, and there's discussion of theories about PK, mind over matter. Kolchak was the X-Files of the 70s? Absolutely. Yeah, the Kolchak remake in 2005 had nothing to do with Kolchak at all. They just called the character that. He was a reporter. That was the only connection at all. That was it. It was kind of crazy. Let's see. What would non-physical activity be? So physical activity is physical stuff moving around, electronics being affected. Visual stuff that you see, like seeing an apparition, That's perceptual activity. It still can be very psychic and paranormal, but that's perceptual activity. So it's not physical in the same as, like, throwing stuff, which is what we see in a lot of poltergeist cases. What's your most memorable case? I have so many. If I do recommend reading my chapter in the book Surviving Death by Leslie Kean, Kean. It talks about one of my favorite cases, which is the case that really, the apparition case, the ghost case that made me come to no other conclusion possible. This is a case that happened in Livermore, California years ago. I don't have enough time to go into it tonight, but it was a family that had individually been seeing a ghost since they moved into this old house, and of a woman who used to own it but did not die in the house. Important to know, she lived there all her life. And they hadn't been talking to each other about it. They all had the same description, but their son had been having a communication with the woman, with the ghost, every day for that year and a half. And we got so much information out that had to be verified by the only living relative of this woman, who was in an assisted living facility. So we truly had that kind of thing. It looks like I froze up there for a minute. Really good case. Again, I recommend kind of reading the chapter in that book. That's probably the best place to find it. And if you haven't read Surviving Death, it really goes into the evidence for life after death from a number of different perspectives as well. There's also a TV series based on the book, but it doesn't really cover the material in the book the same way. The series is called Surviving Death. It is on Netflix, and I'm in episode 5. All right, Darren McGavin later appeared in The X-Files as an FBI agent who preceded Mulder as the X-Files investigator. The character was named Arthur Dale. Yes, that is right, and that was an homage to, they brought him on because of Kolchak, because Chris Carter, the creator of the show, happened to be a fan of the Kolchak series, as a matter of fact. And I'll mention an odd fact about that name. There's a Chris Carter who is a parapsychologist. There's a Chris Carter who is a TV producer and created and produced The X-Files. And there's a Chris Carter who is a mentalist and psychic entertainer. And I met Chris Carter, the producer, many years ago. I know Chris Carter, the entertainer, quite well, and I'm in communication every so often with the Chris Carter who's a parapsychologist. That's a weird thing. I'm not sure exactly what that means, but, kind of weird. All right, we're down to about the last 7 minutes now. I will mention right now that even though this has been every other week for the most part, we are skipping 3 weeks to the next date, mainly because I'll be traveling both next Sunday and the following Sunday, the 12th. I won't be back in time. I'm going to actually be doing some stuff at the Rhine Research Center. There should be, it's not up on the website today, but if you look this week at rhine.org, that's RHINE.org, and look at the events, there should be also a banner that has it. I'll be doing a lecture, which will also be on webcast on Friday night, November 10th, on science fiction and psychic phenomena. So I'm going to talk about movies, TV shows, some literature, comic books, and things like that. That's the lecture I'll be talking about. So we're talking about all this media stuff a little bit. I'll touch a little bit of horror too, as well. So it's Rhine, RHINE.org. Again, it's going to be a lecture. It'll be on, I think it's 7 o'clock Eastern time, which means 4 o'clock on the West Coast on Friday, November 10th. I'll be doing it from the library of the Rhine Center. We'll be webcasting that. And if any of you happen to be in the Durham, North Carolina area, I'll be doing a workshop only for the people there. It'll be a live workshop at the Rhine on the 11th in the afternoon. That'll also be announced on the website. Kind of a limited number of people can come to that. It'll be a psychic development workshop, possibly with a spoon bending party at that point. All right, we're at 5 minutes now. Anybody? Let's see here. Paul, I think scientists say 95% of the universe is made up of dark matter and dark energy. Yeah, that's true. But, it's called dark energy and dark matter because we don't know what it is. In fact, to quote Saul Perlmutter, who was one of the physicists who came up with dark energy, actually won a Nobel Prize, from a press party or press event that I attended at Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory a number of years ago. He said when some reporter asked him, what is dark energy? Is it like something, is it dark in color? Is it dark? And he looked at them and said, we're in the dark. We don't know what it is. We're in the dark, so we called it dark energy. All right. So it's not really something necessarily, it's invisible. We don't know what it is. We don't know what dark matter is because we can't detect it, although there's some headway in that from what I read recently. And we may have actually discussed that. All right. How is it like to make a living as a parapsychologist? Well, not good, honestly. There are people who are parapsychologists who work for universities full-time, and they can do their work that way. There are folks who do work at a couple of research organizations here in the States and in the UK, certainly. I have come close to making a full-time living as a parapsychologist a few times, but that included also giving lectures at colleges. I write books, which don't really bring a lot of money. I teach. I have a day job and have had one quite a lot of time over my last 40 years. Sometimes it's been part-time, sometimes it's been full-time. Right now it's full-time. Just because there's no money. I mean, there's very little money coming into the field from funders, so it makes it very, very difficult. All right. Day, do you ever go to the East Coast? Well, I'm going to the East Coast next Sunday. I'm going to North Carolina. So I'll be in the Raleigh-Durham area for a week. I do come to New York once in a while, usually for a few days to see my mom and my brothers. I'm from the New York City, just outside of New York City, from White Plains, New York, originally. And, the only other time I may go to New York is if somebody brings me there. Or go to the East Coast. Somebody brings me there. So, yes, Mew, it is really hard to make a living as a parapsychologist, especially honestly. And I'll just say this right off the bat, that I was doing a lot of college lectures, which were very, really, really good for me, both from a support, financial perspective and also from a professional perspective. And then the TV shows started up. Ghost Hunters started up and the other shows started up. And between the TV show Paracelebs, as they're often called, and in 2008, the downturn of the economy and other things, the opportunities for college lectures at even the lowest level of what colleges pay for lectures on site has disappeared for those of us in the field. It's almost, unless you happen to know somebody at the college, it's pretty much only the TV people, unfortunately. So that's really, really difficult. And I appreciate the sentiment there. All right. Let's see if there's anything last here. I will be in Chicago, theoretically, next July. I'll be there for an event connected to my work, my day job, but I'm hoping to spend a few extra days because I went to Northwestern and I've got friends in the area, so I'm hoping to stick around for a couple of days. So, Paul, I'll certainly let you know for that. All right. And, yeah, Graveyard Grog, if I can make it to Pennsylvania, to your area, we can see about hanging out. Well, again, the next episode or next time I'll be doing this will be November 19th. So that's Sunday, November 19th. 2 weeks after, December 3rd. 2 weeks after that, December 17th. That'll be it for the year because the following Sunday is Christmas Eve. The following Sunday is New Year's Eve. Not going to be doing those. So the first one will be the first full Sunday after New Year's Eve in January. We'll be coming back. So again, it'll be November 19th, December 3rd, December 17th. We're talking about possibly also doing two on one of those days in December. One at earlier in the day for those folks who might be in the UK, because I have a lot of colleagues and other folks where I know it's really late at night in the UK. So watch for an announcement. Definitely subscribe to this channel so you can see the announcement of anything different that's coming up and be notified of what's going on. So do mark your date for November 19th for the next one. Yes, you can definitely, Tasha, you can definitely email me. It is simply askprofparanormal@gmail.com, or you can send it to profparanormal@gmail.com. Prof as in professor. Yeah. And there we go. Yeah, right after the exclamation point there, askprofparanormal@gmail.com. So I keep an eye on those email addresses pretty closely. All right, folks, thanks for joining me today. Hope everybody has a great Halloween, and we'll see you next time. Go out and play on Tuesday.